And we are live. And today is something special. Again, I said several times I don't want the main focus of the show to be political, but the dragon brought a very interesting suggestion of something we could react to. And this is why Canada is a warning to the rest of the world. I cannot wait to get into this. And yeah, how are you, the dragon?
I'm good. I've had this video in my back pocket for a while.
About
I
a
had
month ago, I made a
hold on,
video called
pause it. Let me give you the idea. Patrick Boyle is runs a YouTube channel. He largely covers political, but it's mostly from an economical standpoint. So a lot of this is the economic standpoint. Like he has, you should link it in below. He's very much sometimes long form. He made his span going against the cryptocurrencies and stuff like that. He's not a crypto bro or anything like that. He exposes the frauds in it. This is largely why Canada, it's about the socio-economic as well at, but from a more economic perspective of why. He mentioned some of the changes, like Multi would know more of the policies that probably would have led to it, but he's going over the economic side of when Canada slid. He did last month was the UK, to give you the idea.
We could actually cover the UK thing after, like next week. Next
Yeah,
week
let me see how
we will
long
cover.
the UK one
But
is, though.
like next week I will have more time because next week we will do it like Friday, and Friday I have more
Yeah,
time.
it's gonna be longer. I think it's
But
longer because, see, you might know some of these policies he's talking about
yeah.
because this is the more of the timelines and he uses the graphs and things.
So, with that being said, let's really get into Patrick Boyle on why is Canada a warning to the rest of the world. Let's get into it.
The UK is a Warning to the Rest of the World. It was about the entirely avoidable economic stagnation that overtook what was once the world's preeminent industrial power. The comment section of that video was unusually lively, but some comments really stood out. A lot of my viewers were saying some version of just change the
I
name of the
remember
country
this.
and you've basically described Canada. They said this, it should be noted, very politely.
It's funny because I will let you know on something. We used to be polite, right? That used to be our standard. But here's the thing: we are also people that don't like to offend, and that's been a thing for years. But you know what happened? Trudeau happened. We started dunking on the states, and I do think we changed. Trudeau wired us in another way. To say we are still polite is a damn lie. We are compliant. We are obedient to our government. This is what we are, and this is why the right is so pissed. We are pissed. I am pissed. We don't want to be obedient anymore with people that are out of touch with reality and what's going on. But hey, Canada is a far left country, therefore we keep electing the same folks. But again, I think we used to be polite. That used to be true, and it's also because we didn't want to offend. But now we are turned into attack dog against the right because this is how the liberals wired us to become like. And this is also because of all of our institutions that are left leaning. So again, to say we are polite is now not so accurate anymore. And it's really because of the establishment, what they did to us. Um, Humans are very easy to manipulate and control when you know what you can use to trigger them. But yeah, let's play more of that. I
Oh,
like the premise.
let me say there's a counterpoint to this. Arch is often considered like Arch is Norwegian. When you go to certain areas, let's say like even if you go to a local like Asian food mart or other foreign owned stores, right? There is a thing is every culture has a different thing about politeness. Okay. The thing about this is, it's very much like Norwegians are. Norway is really a nation that's like the size of New York. It basically, what they consider polite is you just don't impede. Arch has often talked about why Arch is nice. Hello, how are you? Basically, Arch is often considered a thing, like he gets jokingly called a Swede. Yet the interesting part about it is his culture, they go out of their way not to offend somebody, but they can be bold. But it is also a society that has always leaned a little bit socialistic, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because they still have a king, but it's been
We also have a king, even if they don't have the
well.
political power they used to. We
Let me
still have
let
a
me say it
king.
like this, because a lot of people misconstrue politeness for not being able to be rude and bold. It's like when you come to the southern United States. One of the key phrases you need to watch for is something along the lines of "bless your heart." We have southern hospitality, but we will be suspicious. And if you ever hear a phrase similar to "bless your heart," you don't realize you're being offended, or it's a polite way of saying you're retarded or stupid.
I like it. I want more of that in Canada. We need that.
It's
Uh,
there's a way of going around it, because but there's also social conditioning, because you can look at the opposite, like the US. We are very combative with our government and our ruling
I
body.
wish we were like the convoy was something, like it was something for Canadian to stand up for once, but the government crushed it, and it's the end of that. Anyway, I guess now we can play more of that because we didn't get the we didn't get the clear picture
Howdy.
now. So let's get into it.
But today, let's talk about Canada. Now, back in 2012, a comparison like that would have seemed absurd. At that point, the global consensus on Canada was that it was the ultimate best of all worlds economy. It had the natural resources of a Gulf state, the social safety net of a Northern European country, and a housing market that only seemed to move in one direction. Canada is a country that on paper should be one of the wealthiest nations on
And that's
earth. It
true.
has the second largest landmass in the world. It holds the
I will pause here because something came up to my mind. I gotta say, we used to be prosperous, and it's kind of hilarious how people forget that. But we look back now, 11 years ago, not that long ago, we used to have one of the best middle class in the OCD. You know why? We had the conservative in power. And what happened with Trudeau? Everything crashed and burned. Let's no longer use fossil fuel and whatever because we hate polluting while using a plane to fly all around the globe. But hey, let's protect the environment. Climate change, climate change. But again, what happened with Trudeau is we threw out the window something that was part of why we were such a prosperous nation. Our immigration system was point based and it was amazing. But you know what happened? Trudeau said, you know what? Let's do the Century Initiative. So what happened? We got our country flooded with immigration because they wanted to buy votes and they wanted to be progressive to replace the whites. This is what happened. And one of the consequences, the wages go down. And when we have a government that says no oil, no mineral, no fossil fuel, whatever, when they don't want to use our resources, and when they drive down wages, it's a decline we are planning. And this is what happened in 2015. Trudeau came in and he destroyed everything that worked well for Canada. And again, we had 9 years under the Conservative that were quite good. And even before the Conservative, like when we had Paul Martin, that was the previous Liberal before Stephen Harper in the early 2000s, it was quite good. I don't agree with Paul Martin, but at least it wasn't some zealot that said, no more with oil, no more with mineral, keep all of the resources underground. We didn't get that with people before Trudeau. It's really Trudeau that opened the gate for really bad policies across the board. Think of any policies that Trudeau came up with, and it's bad. Even weed. You know why it's bad? It's because it stunned people. People are stupid. They're no longer connecting with real world because now they have more ways to escape it. So every single ideas Trudeau came up with are bad. He
Well,
really created the groundwork for the decline of Canada.
so here's a funny thing. Let me push back because what you're saying is because it's kind of like India is not there. India is a developing nation. Let's look at Brazil. Notably, Brazil is a third world. I was looking through the comment section of this particular video, and people are comparing it to now Brazil. Brazil is a first world country, but acts like a third world country. When you see this, that so when you act like it is a third world country, right? The issue is itself is not only do they lose the middle class, not only do they, because you can look at a nation and see why it declined. The issue is itself is Canada. I distinctly remember having a lower population. And then,
Again, that's before
but
2014.
let me say this too. You got to realize too, last part about this, you have to understand, and I've tried to tell this about multi, understand what progressivism is. US, back when Obama got elected, Obama was very much a socialistic or progressive candidate back in the day. A lot of his stuff, you can just go back to that time period in the US. He walked back nearly 30 to 40 years of race relations with like Trayvon Martin. That's a very controversial take, but this is history has proven it. We had Black Lives Matter in 2020. The tribalism got worse back again, and we hadn't seen that level of racism.
And we also got the same thing with Trudeau. So again, to close off that segment, I do think Trudeau, what he did is he brought a bag of really bad policies, and because we are proud progressive, we embrace that at the fullest, and that's why um, I'm
It,
losing faith in Canada because we don't think about the bad side of all of these progressive policies. We only pretend we are progressive. I don't think we are anymore. Like um, when we
it,
see the result of these policies, I think it's a downgrade. I think it's regression. Anyway,
Basically, there's a theory I have, and this is something that I need to find a final thesis on with good examples. There's a lot of policies everyone does. Conservatives leading governments are usually less inclined. Like you'll see in the US, and I have to look at it, it's all policies all over the US. Liberal areas will basically say we need to solve homeless issues. Let's say Canada was the first to go, we need to, let's say, legalize free use of marijuana, right? Legalize
yeah,
drugs, medical marijuana,
yeah,
free drug use. They don't realize down the line that encourages and opens up the culture for acceptance and other stuff down the line. Now, here's the interesting thing about this. A lot of liberal policies will create what they think is a solution, then they're having to create a solution to another problem that arises from one of their policies. Does this make sense, Multi?
Yeah.
Because, and then it's like a cascade failure of the system, because every nation at some point has always that falls. Like Europe, capitalism, conservatives and liberals both sing with those regimes. There's always a collapse of policies because a lot of liberal governments come in riding the wave of other governments, and then it all collapses. Basically, it's theory of, well, people haven't said this officially. Liberals create a situation, and this is something I'll let the video play out because I know he's limited on time, but you got to remember, look at the effect of the policy. In the U.S., we change parties every 8 years.
We don't. That's a big
We
issue with
have,
Canada.
because look, there's no guarantee that just because Trump had a bye term, he's on his second term, but apart from Biden. The thing is, he's still going to have to survive midterms. And the thing about it is, midterms during a president's time is a judgment on your policies.
And that's great. We should adopt that in Canada, but we are too progressive to think about democracy, right? Anyway, let's play more of that now because I see time flies. Let's get into more of the video.
The third largest proven oil reserves. It's fifth in natural gas. It has an abundance of uranium, potash, rare earth minerals, and fresh water. It has a highly educated population, a stable democracy, rule of law, and G7 membership.
Rule of law.
By
is
every
debatable.
measure of endowment, Canada should be a superpower. In fact, there was a brief window in 2012 where the median Canadian household actually pulled ahead of its American counterpart, becoming by several measures the most affluent middle class in the world. Looking back from 2026, it's clear that this outperformance was driven by a unique set of circumstances. It was the height of a global commodity boom, where crude oil prices had nearly quadrupled over a decade, and the Canadian dollar was trading at or above parity with the US dollar.
And again, we speak about 2012. That was under the Conservative and by the end of their mandate. And I will also add this education. From the outside, it's always great, right? But when you look in the inside, when you are in the system, look, I did post high school studies. I did study a lot of different things. And you know what was in common in every different program I studied in? The ideology. Our institution in Canada are all left leaning. And they go full on swing socialists. So most of these people that are proud to have these degrees, they are basically wired and brainwashed into thinking the system we used to have for years is broken. Therefore, we should move towards socialism, move toward capital, toward communism, and that kind of stuff. This is what happens in the school. They push that ideology. They are all socialists. They are all center left or far left, and this is
Multi.
brain
You're
rot.
talking about, in short, you're talking about in the U.S. we have a problem with our teachers. Just to give you an idea that might explain it, and I've talked about there's indoctrination on the left and the right. See, I may have to introduce him to something on Yuri Blezhinov. He was introduced back to the modern zeitgeist with the Call of Duty Cold War trailer. He was a Russian ex-KGB agent.
I've seen the clip. I know what you're talking
So
about.
let me explain it to people. He basically, Soviets won the hearts and the minds by indoctrination.
What's
And
going on in Canada? Exactly this.
there is pure things. So what people didn't realize with progressives and liberals, they were getting into the education system. And this is a problem we're fighting in. Even, let's say, when I was going through school, you could tell that the teachers were becoming more ideologically captured. And the thing about this is, this does translate to politics and down to economy, basically. Economic policy is downstream from political policy, or sometimes influences it up. So you were talking about an era of, like, right now, we have a lot of youth that are being taught by socialist, like, it used to be said high school people were conservative, they would go to college to become radicalized liberals. But here's the thing, they're starting younger. Call it the LGBTQ agenda. They teach kids stuff about politics and social stuff before the ABCs. So I am not shocked that the younger generation is not as intelligent as
They are
well.
filled with brain rot. So I will also piggyback on what you said. So I will also share my personal experience. Way back then, after high school, when I was doing post-secondary studies, and I did try out so many different things because I didn't feel like I was fitting in anything. I was actually center left way back then. And the first vote I ever pulled was for the NDP. Back then, they were not the NDP we have today, but like way back then, they were like these socialists, but not necessarily far left the way they are right now. Like they were more like somewhere like center left, but like a bit more left than center. And we had the liberal that were way back then in the center. That's before Trudeau era. And we had the conservatives that were actually a lot more far right than now. So that was a very different political landscape. But again, the first ballot I ever placed was in the NDP because uh, I was a socialist because school told me and taught me be a socialist. It's when I really hit the field and when I really started working and make my money that I realized, dang, these taxes are bad, and the only way a socialist can really raise revenue is through taxation. This is what's going on, and it's kind of funny because even in the book's value of Carney, he basically says, yeah, we should eliminate private property. Therefore, we should have public money and that kind of stuff. And anything you should do should benefit everyone in society. Um, and it's kind of rich coming from someone that has tax haven. Anyway, um, again, way back then, when I was still like young and in school, I was a socialist. I wasn't the hardcore socialist, but I was somewhere there in that spectrum. That's with growing up and realizing what it meant that I realized, dang, it's bad. I don't like it.
You didn't realize it.
Yeah,
Because the thing is, this is why, and I hate it, like, natural LGBT people are fine. The QIA plus are the people who screwed the pooch on that one. Pardon the phrase if it comes out terribly. But they are the ones, like, people don't realize ideologically capturing a nation has an effect and it shows up. Here's the other thing that had happened in the US and globally as well. Let's assume a company, again, let's use Relic that did Dawn of War 1 to, or Blizzard even, prior games. When the new people come in to replace the old, they weren't hiring on meritocracy. They were hiring because they could work with the people. So What, AI channel? No, Patrick Boyle's not an AI channel. No. Patrick Boyle does long form essays. You should check it. He basically is very good channel. He basically
I just realized I was muted. But to
so
close off the tangent, I will say this before we move on. I really feel like education in the Western now today in 2010 or something, I really feel like we have become indoctrinated so much. The schools are left leaning and they're not there to educate you anymore. They are there to brainwash you into thinking a certain way. That's exactly how I feel towards school. And again, it's coming from me that spent years after high school in different programs to learn different things. And I've seen it all. School is no longer about knowledge, it's about ideology. And that's what's very much broken about the system, especially in Canada. Uh, Ask any person with a higher degree than high school, they will all tell you, I'm a liberal, I'm a, a freaking socialist or something like that. Like, it's across the board. It's like a hive mind. Um, anyway, let's play more of that because there's so much to cover. Let's get into it.
While high energy prices were a headwind for the US, they were a massive tailwind for Canada. But if you look at the data today, that era of outperformance has vanished. The decline isn't marked by a sudden collapse or a dramatic crisis. It's a slow but always polite stagnation.
we call this the green energy. The thing to go to the green energy, you had to replace solar. And that started under Obama in the US. It hit Canada a lot harder.
Yeah, because again, we are further
Net
left than you
zero.
guys.
Net zero
Yeah,
policies. As
Trudeau and Carney, two really disgusting individual. But yeah, decline is a great word. So let's continue. But he's right. There's a decline.
Between 2012 and today, Canada has fallen from number 6 on the World Happiness Index to number 25, its lowest ranking since the survey began. To see a national mood sour this quickly, you usually have to look at countries whose central banks have been replaced by printing presses or whose borders are being redrawn. In Canada,
Oh, and sorry to stop it. Do you remember that interview we went over last week? He talked about printing, money
Yeah,
printing.
yeah,
He's a fiscal guy. He does hedge funds and he looks at markets.
yeah,
So printing money can hurt your value overall. US is approaching that because we had our currency downgraded. But there's something he said in the beginning that I should have said that I think missed. Saudi Arabia values its nation on the value of the petrodollar, which is the oil price versus everything. Russia had this as well. That's why if they push back against the petrodollar, that's kind of what he should have said. It was the petrodollar values, oil versus the cost of it. That's where a lot of people, and I've seen this in a lot of interviews with, sorry, I'm blanking his name. He doesn't understand. Petrodollar is a really good way to keep your economy afloat, but it is also very chaotic.
yeah. Let's play more of that. Again, there's a decline, and it's obvious, except for the liberals, because the liberals know their track record and they will try to deny it, they will lie about it, and they will pretend everything is good. And because Canadians are indoctrinated and propagandized, they will believe anything the government will tell them because they are obedient. Anyway, let's play more.
the institutions are still there and the borders haven't moved. It's just that the arithmetic of a middle class life has slowly stopped balancing. National income per head has fallen from roughly 80% of the American level in the decade before the pandemic to around 70% today. If Canadian provinces were American states, Alberta, the oil rich outlier, would rank around 20th wealthiest, somewhere between Colorado and Tennessee. Ontario, Canada's most populous and economically central province, would rank 48, below Montana, below Alabama, and below every southern state except
And by
Mississippi.
the way, Ontario is the Indian province because we flooded that province of Indian. Like every bad stories about car crash and really bad roads are all in Ontario. Like I've seen a crazy video like a few weeks ago. There was that Indian that was driving a truck and he decided, you know what, I will stop my truck by a train track, and he left the truck, and there was the gate to tell there's a train incoming, but he didn't give a crap. He just passed through that gate, and then he left the truck. And you know what happened? The train collided with the truck, blowing up the cabin, the pilot part of the truck. And the Indian was like laughing. It's like, bruh, what's going on there? Or
Here's
there's another video about another Indian. You know what he did? He stopped his car. It was like a taxi guy in the middle of the street. He stopped his car and he took a shit in the street on the sidewalk. It's hilarious and disgusting. And we had someone that was like, "What are you doing there?" And the Indian in the middle of the street taking a dump. It was like, "Leave me alone, leave me alone." And the guy was like, "But what are you doing in my street in front of my yard?" Like, it's really like you cannot make this up. Really, it's disgusting. Um, by
um
the way, there's also another story. I don't know if you heard about that one, but that was another Indian driving a truck around, and he was doing speeding craziness, and he basically ended three lives and injured six-person. And you know what he did? He left the country, and then when he came back, he got a slap in the wrist, and he was freed because if he did some jail time, he would have been deported, and they didn't want to deport him. So the guy basically ended three lives and injured six people, but because he's Indian and we want these Indian here, we just let him do whatever.
there's a big thing about a lot of, like, when you talk about Ontario, places like that, you can go look at the what we call the Rust Belt, right?
Yeah,
The Rust Belt for us is up near the Great Lakes, where a lot of the stuff comes in from Canada, which was Chicago, Detroit, that area, Wisconsin, things of that nature. Now, those used to be the most profitable manufacturing sectors of our nation. And it wasn't because we lost our manufacturing sectors. Interesting part is a lot of socialistic policy and progressives prior to branching out to everywhere else were in the Chicago and Detroit region. That area became one of the Chicago, you got to bear in mind, even Detroit had that. Then it went down to a fields of abandoned houses. You can buy a shitty house for $100, and it's like, it literally is. It took about 10 years, 15 years of liberal policy. It was liberal policies and bad governing. Like, to this day, Chicago, look, Chicago is progressive and socialistic. They went from liberal to being socialistic to being very super progressive. Every
and and
time,
and by the way, before I forget, I must say this: like when we had the point system, when we had an actual good immigration system, we didn't get all of the three stories I told you about. These three stories are like recent stories, and you know what happened? It's people no longer integrate. They no longer assimilate. They no longer become part of the group. They create their own group, and this is what happened when Trudeau just opened the gates to anything and anyone that wanted to come. We even have terror lord now. We are a ground of terror lords. So again, the decline, I think one of the biggest issue is really like the decline of our society, because now we let anyone in, even if they don't fit our uh, meant to be free country. I say meant to be because I don't think we are free anymore. But this is what happens when you got a circus. You get clowns everywhere. It's ridiculous.
I
Again, the decline has so many factors, and I think that one of the biggest factor of that decline is weak leadership. We don't have any leadership. Do you call Trudeau a leader, Dragon?
No, I think a lot of it is, it's kind of like if you think of leadership, because like one guy, if you're talking cultural zeitgeistness, it's not that we have it. It's like everyone had an issue we knew when the millennials got the power. Like currently, your government is only as good as your last people in. Like no conservative. Let's just give you an idea. In the US, it wasn't that Bush was a bad leader. He failed to control the rise of the neocons that shattered faith in most of Republicans as well as conservatives. They took over the party. It wasn't the party of Gingrich anymore. That's why a lot of us, the Republicans, do crack down on the Tea Party, because in their extremes, they are nutty. The trick about this is Canada was slowly, most of us saw Canada drifting socially left. Like there's a comment in this video. Someone drove past a University of Toronto, one of the big universities. Almost all the people attending that he saw constantly are foreigners getting
Yeah.
degrees.
Again, we are also a far left country, and again, before I close off that tangent to go to the next part of that video, I will say this: one of the big factors is the immigration. When you flood your country, uh, people that you let in, and eventually you give them the right to vote, they will vote for whoever is in power, whoever makes policies that will help them. So these Century Initiative folks, they do that to maintain power, because they know if they get all of these Indian, all of these Arabs, they will vote for them because they are the progressive. Look, we are progressive. We welcome you here. Vote for us now. And again, the other factor is a lot of Canadian born people, they are disconnected from politics. They don't think about it, they think about other stuff, and they don't really get involved that much anymore. So what's going on? Who is getting involved in politics? The foreigners and the newcomers, and they are the one that will decide of your political landscape. And the other faction that will actually decide of your political landscape is all of these scholars that were indoctrinated and that were brainwashed into thinking socialism is working. I'm sure we can find example where it did work, but but there are far more example that I can think of that didn't work. Canada isn't working. People are going at food banks at record use, and guess what? These food banks are no longer providing enough food anymore. And another example of where it failed, Argentina. Look at that. Like they had that for like 40 years. They had a big decline, and then the new guy came in, like I believe it's 3 years ago, and he changed everything, and now they are slowly climbing back. But if they didn't get these far left policies, that socialist mindset, I'm sure Argentina would be one of the strongest economies, but they could not
Uh,
be because of.
South America is a different issue because a lot of what you're thinking about, multi, is it's a cultural decline. The idea is Eisenhower said it. People forget there's a part to every part of the Eisenhower parting speech. Everyone forgets. Everyone talks about the military industrial complex part. Eisenhower despised Kennedy. not for the reasons people think. Eisenhower despised Kennedy because he did not think Kennedy was a good leader. Because Eisenhower came from the post-war generation. Democrats wanted him, Republicans wanted him at the time. Both liberals and conservatives both wanted him as candidate. It turned out he ran with the conservatives. A responsible voting public, and I encourage people to watch it. A responsible voting public holds a government accountable.
Yes, and we don't do that in Canada. As long as it's a liberal, we don't give a crap. So that's what's going on.
Yeah.
That's why we are in a decline, because we don't hold the government accountable. And I feel like you guys in the States, it's very different. You hold government accountable. That's why there's always a pendulum, because eventually in your 4 to 8 years in power, you will mess up somewhere. And if the electorate really follows up what's going on, they will notice, they will know, they will be like, oh, this is where they messed up, I need to vote them out. In Canada, no, let's give a 10 chance because that person is a liberal. This is what's going on. So let's play more of the video, because I see time flies, and I want to hear more about his thesis on why is Canada a warning to the rest of the world.
New Brunswick would rank dead last, below Mississippi. The provinces that contain most of Canada's population sit near the bottom of the combined list. A country that was briefly richer per capita than the United States is now having a serious debate about whether it can arrest a generational decline. The British disease that I described last month was an object lesson in compounding errors, but Canada's version of this stagnation is unique. It's a story of how a country with every possible advantage managed to fall into what Bank of Canada Senior Deputy Governor Caroline Rogers called, in a 2024 speech, a productivity emergency. The reason I think the rest of the world should pay attention to Canada is not that Canada is failing spectacularly. It is failing gradually, systematically, and in ways that are entirely legible, compounding errors that reinforce each other, each one individually defensible, collectively ruinous. The same patterns are visible in countries across the developed world. Canada just got there first. So let's go through them. But before we do, let me tell you about this week's video sponsor, GenSpark
Oh, well, pause.
You've already loved
pause.
GenSpark 2.0 with Agent AI.
Pause. Why didn't you cut it out?
So your data more repetitive tasks, communication. Consider a thought experiment.
Oh, there we go.
Imagine a professional sports league where the same 3 or 4 teams win every line up. Play declines. Without genuine competition, have been structured over the decades to make it very difficult for anyone new to enter. What tends to happen over time is not just that.
Why did you pause? We are fine now. But okay, I will tell you this.
Been structured over the decades.
I will push back a bit, Wage. So I think the PPC, they will never win anything. They are far right, but we are too progressive. That's the thing. But the other thing is the conservative are actually center right under Pierre Poilievre, of course. If you look back at Stephen Harper, they were also center right. I think the last far right we had was Brian Mulroney, but that's like 40 years ago. But again, I think eventually we will have a right-leaning government. Well, that's magic thinking. So what I think is 2029 is our last chance. The next general election, we must vote conservative. And then that will mean the pendulum swings back. If we don't, then we are cooked and we ultimately become a one-party state like China. Why did you play that? Anyway, Um, again, very interesting point from the bald guy. Um, I think the pendulum can swing, but we need enough swing voters to embrace it. And that's in the next election. Hopefully, we get that.
Same 3 or 4 teams win every year. They have the largest stadiums, the biggest TV deals, and the most expensive players. The other teams are technically allowed to compete, but the rules of the game have been structured over the decades to make it very difficult for anyone new to enter. What tends to happen over time is not just that the incumbents win, it's that the whole quality of play declines. Without genuine competitive pressure, there's no incentive to innovate, to take risks, or to improve.
So I pause here because I think we can have a very interesting discussion about everything you said up to now. So I think Canada is a warning to the rest of the world because we embraced way too much centralized decision making. We subsidize way too much things, and we decided the free market is not for us. And the other day, it's kind of funny. The other day, I had that argument with someone that thought Quebec was a capitalist province because he was brainwashed into taking that in the schools. And what I told him is look around you. What is not subsidized by the government? He had no idea. You know why? Because the government, especially in Quebec, because Quebec is one of the most progressive province in Canada, everything is subsidized by the government. Electricity, public transit, what else? What else? School, what else? What else? Well, um, every single thing is subsidized. The industry, the farm industry, even telecoms, the media, every aspect of society is fueled by the government. We make investment flee. They don't want to deal with our tax system. And also, the other factor is the smaller companies, the smaller businesses, they don't get the same kind of support as the big ones that the government support. The subsidies, they go to the ones that are already established. So it's like a monopoly. It's like it's really hard for me to explain,
It's a
but
monopoly. It's kind
yeah,
of
a monopoly.
like
Yeah, exactly.
the concept is we just had in the U.S. Live Nation got deemed a monopoly. They're the ones who bought Ticketmaster, right?
Yeah,
So you're talking occasionally. We've had this over time. It's kind of like if you look at the see, I've often said we're approaching the cyberpunk future where corporations become very powerful.
Canada
So,
is
so
exactly like that.
here's something you forget. You're thinking the word is constant. There was an idea that yes, the government does favor actual people. Like government will go, okay, we prefer this or we prefer this company. Now, reality is there's favoritism.
Yeah,
Now,
and
I've never
it's
said.
what's going on in Canada,
Now, let
and
me
that's
say
why
this too. There's
that
this
that
thing.
that's why nobody wants to invest anymore in Canada. That's why it's not a free market because the government decides to fund a lot of these monopolies, as you called it. That was the exact
So
word I was searching.
here's the very interesting part about where capitalism is, and Patrick Boyle hasn't ever said this in one of his videos, but you can gather it. Is crony capitalism is the problem. If you think the Elons of the world and the Jeff Bezos, funny, like, and I'll say this story because you got to think about with capitalism. Jeff Bezos toured his game studio. He didn't even realize he owned a game studio. This is the weird part about where Canada and other nations are. Other nations and people, crony capitalists consolidate their power. And it's very
and this is why nobody wants to invest in Canada. The tax, the regulation, the laws, it's so complicated. It's really anti-development. It's anti free market. If we didn't subsidize most of the institution and most of the aspect of society, I think Canada would collapse because nobody wants to come here. As simple as that. So we are a warning to the rest of the world. Socialism doesn't work. Anyway, let's play more of that video.
Canada's domestic economy has, in several of its most important sectors, been running this kind of league for 30 years. Take telecommunications. Canada has 3 dominant carriers.
And that's true. And Quebec has only Bell and Videotron, but they are both connected to TELUS and Rogers. So it's like the monopoly we mentioned. And also the other thing is the housing market. Nobody wants to build anything because it takes years to get government approval, and the government can also on a whim decide, you know what, we are not doing it anymore. So you invested so much money in the infrastructure and you cannot go through with it. As the GDP of, yeah, even there, I'm pretty sure New York is more rich than that. But again, monopolies are everywhere in Canada. We don't have a free market. We just don't.
Bell, Rogers, and TELUS, who collectively hold roughly 89% of wireless subscribers.
And by the way, the free market forces the industries to think about strategies to make profit. When there's no free market, you don't need to think. The government will save you. So again, if we were business minded, we would also help the smaller one. But no, only the big ones get the government money, so they remain the big ones. We don't let at the door the smaller one.
Canada has, as a result, some of the highest mobile phone bills in the developed world. A comparable unlimited data plan costs roughly twice as much in Canada as in the UK or France. The Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, or the CRTC, which is what you'd call it if you'd like to get home before midnight, has for years been theoretically...
That's a joke. I love this because... We've went over.
I like it. I want that. I hopefully it works. I doubt it. I don't think it will work. Because I think a lot of Albertans, they don't like Ottawa, but they are proud Canadians. So that's why I don't think you will make it. But I'm with all of you in Alberta. I trust you. I like you. I adore you. I think Alberta is the smartest province in Canada. It's the only province in Canada, and I'm not joking. Actually, Saskatchewan is also pretty base, but I'd say Saskatchewan and Alberta are the smartest place in Canada. You both have common sense, something that's been lost on the rest of Canada. But yeah, I was about to say something else. I actually forgot what it was.
He was talking about, okay. Here's the thing about the government said Bell, right? The thing is, that's what you call it if you want to get home before midnight. Because he is also aware of the policies of C19.
Oh, yeah.
And a bunch of the others.
18 and 11. Yeah, CRTC. Okay, CRTC. That's what he brought up. So CRTC is the perfect example that we don't have a free market. So CRTC is basically what regulates our internet, and it creates a China-like dome in Canada where only CRTC decides what's pushed in the algorithm, and only CRTC decide what is seen or not. So they basically control shadow ban and that kind of stuff, and promotion, and it's it's disgusting because again it's a part of government. So the government decides what is pushed on the internet. They control it,
it's
they
like our
regulate it.
FCC. Like we have the FCC in the United States that regulates radio and television and broadcasting. It doesn't
Us, we have that
control
with
it,
the internet.
and they regulate the internet as well. But
Yeah,
to a degree, there's a
they have full control here. That's what's going on.
they don't
That's why
have
there's no free market.
see. There's like after like when the Janet Jackson nipple slip happened on with Justin Timberlake at the Super Bowl, they started cracking down on radio and TV again. There used to be a 10 o'clock rule. You could show stuff after 10 o'clock, right? Like there's a regulatory body, but it's only been in recent times that Trump has threatened to use the FCC with its equality regulations and other stuff. You are supposed to go after platforms like YouTube.
Oh
Is
yeah. By the way,
yeah.
in both the NDP and the Liberals, they were pushing for more taxes on the internet. That's hilarious. But again, the CRTC is against free market. You cannot speak about capitalism if you have a body that decides what works or not on the internet. Again, that goes back to what I said. We are not a capitalistic society. We are very, very much inclined to socialism. And again, CRTC shouldn't exist. CRTC should be dismantled. I just find that disgusting. And that's why when you're in Canada and you try to search for news, you always get these government subsidized media that come up first in the result. And this is because of the CRTC. This is because of the disgusting regulation we have. Is it true Canada, considering taxing people, want to leave Canada? You know what? It's hilarious. So basically, the full story around that is we have the Liberal convention, but let's be honest, our Liberal are far left. And there was that rich guy that studied in Canada, but he did his entire career elsewhere at Google and the States and the UK and the Europes, and he moved around the globe. And then this same guy is very much a liberal. And what did he do? He went at the Liberal convention and he said, we subsidize your school, therefore, if you studied in Canada, you should work in Canada. So what he suggested is a 500,000, $500,000 for scholar to leave Canada. So yes, it is true. They pushed that idea. And the worst in that, the Liberal, and I'd say most of Canadian that lost their common sense, they will be in support of that. And unfortunately, only the Conservative may end up pushing back on that, but they're not in power. And if it keeps going that way, they will never be. But anyway, to get back on track,
He's talking
right now,
about you're talking about the brain drain.
yeah, right now, yeah, brain drain, exactly. But right now, it's not law, so it's not decided. It's not, but there are talks of it, and it always starts with talks of something, and it sets a very bad precedent if they really go through with it, because they end up succeeding. I'm sure they will succeed, and that can take years, but I won't be surprised if in the next election they will platform it. Um,
Uh,
that may end up being in their
give you
platform.
an idea. Arch would love to move from Norway. I mean, he has his family there, his business is there. He's actually very much YouTube is just a hobby of his. he basically, for him to leave, he's talked about this repeatedly. He would have to pay a large amount of taxes, and he's too cheap to pay an exit fee. And there is a fee. Like, it does exist. It's a European thing. So,
But that's kind of funny because we forget that the Soviet Union had the same kind of crap. Um, they had that. So if we really embrace it, if we really make it into law, we will have de facto Soviet Union crap in our system. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. It's sickening. But welcome to Canada, the country that used to be free at some point in history. So let's play more of that.
Open to new entrants, but the practical and regulatory barriers have ensured that meaningful competition never quite materialized.
Subsidize the
Industry has
rich.
spent lavishly on
Contracts don't get
lobbying
built
and
either.
regulatory intervention. It spent rather less on network investment per customer than its counterparts in more competitive markets. Banking tells a similar story. 5 Canadian banks, the Royal Bank, TD, Scotiabank, BMO, and CIBC, hold approximately 90% of deposits in the country. The Canadian banking system is, by design, highly stable. It didn't have a financial crisis in 2008, unlike most of the developed world. This is a genuine achievement, and Canadian bankers will remind you of it at every available opportunity. But stability and
The
dynamism are not
monopoly
the same thing. A
ecosystem.
concentrated banking sector allocates capital conservatively. It lends to proven assets, existing real estate, established corporations, rather than to new ventures. The startup ecosystem that Canada has quietly built, particularly in AI, has often found that the most growth oriented capital came from America.
oh, fun fact, a lot of technology firms about a decade ago moved up to Canada. A lot of game studios, in fact, are in Canada, like Sweet Baby Inc. and a lot of them, like WB Montreal, who was like behind some of the Arkham games, moved
It's
up
funny.
there.
I find that funny.
There's interesting, like, you look at certain sectors, parts
So
of Canada became like Austin is, like for data centers.
Sweet Baby Inc. destroyed the gaming industry, and it's Canadian. So Canada is great at destroying stuff.
But look, no, just look at this like in an interesting perspective. You ever wonder what happened? They and what he's talking about is everyone's been talking about the AI bubble when it bursts. Basically, Canada is banking. There's sections of the tech industry, even in the US, they want. Long story short, the models to maintain it and make sure it works with the power you need and everything else, it's a nightmare. It's ever increasing costs. And like, how do you have an AI data center without having a power plant? What happens when a big company, Amazon or Elon Musk, moves into an area? Does that not affect the rent of the local area? Does that not affect the utility cost of the local area? This is
If
what's
they
going.
set up new phone companies, to stay competitive, the old one must adapt. That's the free market.
But what the big thing is, there's a big thing on the AI bubble. A lot of people are saying it on the technology firms. It's kind of like, I want to say it was Ontario, like up there. They banked a lot on the technology firms because they think the technology. See, Canada thinks if they went from being a mineral exporter to a goods and services economy, it would work. The only reason the U.S.
That's the liberals that think like
The
that.
only reason the U.S. economy works with such a weird manufacturing sector we have is because we still have a goods and services economy. We have the ability to switch to a manufacturing sector, but so much regulatorial commissions would have to be done, but you would also have to change things. So, the more you know. That's what it means by the AI bubble. And the thing is, when a lot of these AI bubble bursts, Mudahar's talked about this. He's in Canada, but
American funds.
a lot of us know it's going to look like the mortgage crisis or the dot-com bubble burst of 2000. Continue.
Not from Bay Street. The pattern repeats in airlines, in groceries, and in broadcasting. A small number of large incumbents protected by ownership restrictions, regulatory capture, or both extract returns from a captive domestic market. The economist's term for this is rent seeking. The polite Canadian term is a stable industry. The consequence is that Canada's labour productivity, the output generated per hour worked, has declined relative to American productivity over time. In 1997, the productivity gap was narrower. Since then, the two economies have diverged by a cumulative 26 percentage points. Canada has not become less productive in absolute terms, it simply failed to keep pace with an economy where competitive pressure is significantly higher and where venture capital has directed hundreds of billions of dollars into the highest productivity sectors of the global economy. Canada spends less than half the OECD average on research and development as a share of GDP, a figure that has been below the average for 2 decades running. There's also
That's what he's talking about. You know, when they talk about generational investment, that's what he's talking about.
And that's funny because each time I hear investment, I hear Carney thinking that paying for school and freaking healthcare is an investment. Bruh, you will never get that money back. I know it's important, but don't pretend you will make some profit there. Um, anyway, here because I think we are moving away from the monopolies discussion. Again, we have milk cartels, we have alcohol cartels, we have cartels of everything. We are so protective, and even within Canada, we are very protective of each other province and territories. It's kind of hilarious. Again, we are not a free economy. We are a economy of monopolies, and that's why everything costs so much. So don't repeat it, folks. Now, you mentioned regulation, laws, and restriction. I will piggyback on that, and I will speak about uh, the First Nation, because to get approval on projects, we virtue signal so much with the liberals that we go to the First Nation all the time for everything, even if we don't need them, even if we could simply do it, because a lot of the things we did actually helped them. Well, who cares? Who cares? So what's going on is we always want their approval, and some chief around are really corrupt, and they don't want the First Nation to prosper because maybe they will stop relying on them. So what's going on? A lot of lobbies within the First Nation things have control over constructing stuff, building things, and even our oil sector. A lot of the First Nation are actually on board with oil and minerals and that kind of stuff. But it's always the chief, it's always the people on top that are like, no, we don't want to be prosperous. And because the liberals virtue signal all the time until they die, they will bend the knee to the chiefs. They will be like, I will be with you, chief. So again, corruption is rampant, and I strongly believe we are turning into a banana republic. Welcome to Canada. Um, I guess now we can play more.
Let me say this on tribal, even in the U.S., when you look at like, let's say take Oklahoma as an example, casinos and gambling. We said this about Texas. Texas, why don't we were losing money to Louisiana and Oklahoma on gambling for the longest time. Some of like the biggest casinos are on native land. So, fun fact, native land, the interesting part is they turned it into a reverse milking scheme of the people who supposedly ruined them. The idea of First Peoples is to be respected. Like, if you ever actually talk to a lot of these communities, they remain tribalistic and loyal to their own kind. They're still protected, but they're so small, even in the grand scheme. There's a rule that the US and other countries try to practice: the many for the one, or the few for the many. Now, this argument is something of usually health policies are. You should protect your native populations. Europe, it's like a joke now because there is no such thing as natives. US, we still have ours, but majority of them are in such a small area, their own reservation. Then Canada, I assume, is the same for you. Like every time we would go over the meeting. We are the first peoples, blah, blah, blah. Like you're basically a dying population. You're just maintaining yourself. But you are respected because you are a protected minority.
And I'll
Now,
also add this, because they are a protected minority in British Columbia, private property is dying because now what's going on? They contested the land. So what was the end result? A land grab. So basically, some owners, they cannot renew the mortgage on their houses, and their houses is no longer theirs. And what it resulted in is now the First Nation in British Columbia are basically a new level of government that can tax you on top of the British Columbia government, the Canadian government, and the municipal government. So now they have that extra layer, and that extra layer is composed of like 20 First Nation people. So like now you will owe a bunch of money to these 20 folks in the other levels of government, because now British Columbia no longer lets you own your own property. It's kind of crazy. And when you have that kind of stupid law where you cannot own anything anymore, no business wants to open shop there. You're like, British Columbia is kryptonite. And when you look into it, oh, it's part of Canada. Guess what? We won't invest in the other parts because we don't know when the other parts will copy British Columbia and add that new level of government. It's crazy. It's ridiculous. We are a clown show, and Canada is a dying country. Let's play more of that now.
The question of internal trade. Canada has a free trade agreement with the United States, Mexico, the European Union, and most of Asia Pacific. It does not have a fully functioning free trade agreement with itself, a structural curiosity that has persisted in various forms since
so they have internal tribalism.
Yeah, exactly. The Quebec milk won't be sold in Ontario. It's easier for us to deal with outsiders than with ourselves. And then they say the federation works. It's hilarious. Welcome to Canada, folks.
In January 2005, the average Canadian home sold for 237,000 Canadian dollars. By early 2026, the average had reached $661,000, a nominal increase of around 179.
Oh, by the way, this is Mirror. You'll hear him talk about housing prices. Here's the thing: for an investor, like if you look at the half of skylines in New York, London, or the major cities in the West, they're owned by Chinese, Saudi, or other foreign type investors. Half of the skyline in New York City and buildings are entirely empty. The thing
That's the
is,
same in Canada. A
do
lot
you
of Chinese
do you remember
they own
the
that.
study that I showed when homes were being built in the US? There's been people who try to commercially buy, like let's say you're in an HOA. It's your option in like I live in a neighborhood, right? 330 homes. We had to vote, do we want to allow an Airbnb? One of my neighbors bought a house. They were Korean. They bought that house as an investment property. Airbnb is considered an investment property. So it can hurt property values. Now, there's a big thing about rental control. This is in New York City. A lot of people, like even under liberal areas and progressive areas, these places create slumlord situations. So when you're talking about commercial properties and the way zoning restrictions work, is why housing prices go up.
By the way, another thing, but that's especially for Canada. So we have more demand than supply because of the massive immigration. And another factor in Canada is the taxes. The taxes are crazy when you own things, and they keep rising and rising and rising. And the end result, you know what's going on? What's going on? The owner, just to stay afloat, they need to charge a lot the people. So the end result is the taxes. It's money to the government directly from the pocket of the people that rent. It's not even to the owner.
So when the
It's
poor get
from the
poorer,
renter.
basically. So when the poor get poorer, the idea, I live in an area that's not bad. But if I go 3 miles or 4 miles another direction, you start to get into slums. There's an area, just a 1 bedroom apartment will cost you or set you back. Like I live in my
I don't
area.
know if I told you, but Canada is in such a bad shape that in both Montreal and Toronto, we got camps with tents. People are freaking living in tents. Even not
Jesus.
like even some of the third world countries, they don't have such a bad housing market. And you know what? These tents, they were not around 12 years ago. They started popping up in the last 6 to 7 years. And again, another common factor, the liberals were in charge.
So you're talking about the cost of rent is the other thing people need to understand, because a lot of like rent control, cost of living. Let's assume he's already hit on the wages have dropped.
Because we got so much immigration,
And
so we can
people,
have
how
cheaper
many
labor.
people would you know are living paycheck to paycheck? They're one bad month from being homeless. This is why when we in the US, we don't know about this. And if I ever get multi on the politics for the US, the Democrats don't tell people they've kept the TSA so underfunded, DHS. TSA agents are having struggling paying bills. They're going, even government employees that they're trying to protect are starting to live paycheck to paycheck. One
Canada
pay,
has been like that for years now.
yeah.
And it's not just like minimum wage people. Like minimum wage, you don't survive. You need another job. But like people that are well above the minimum wage struggle and live paycheck to paycheck. Um, like just to be comfortable, you need to make around 100K. So that's like 20% of Canadian.
Fuck. That would pay like where I live 100K a year would easily pay for
And again, that's 20%,
multiple
bro.
years of living, unless you're just absolutely wasted.
20% of the population is well off. And yet we keep voting the same trap. Welcome to Canada. the communist country.
God.
percent, or nearly tripling in price. Even adjusted for inflation, the gain is still huge. In the country's largest cities, it's been transformational. Now, there's a common comparison made in conversations about Canadian housing that homes have outperformed the stock market over time. It's worth pausing on this. On a straight price.
By the way, Multi, you might find this interesting, but I kind of know what he's talking about. Because what he's about to get into is retail A investment. And there was a thing, just to give people an idea, what caused the housing bubble burst, which caused the financial crisis of '08, which nearly sunk about 20 to 30% of the global market on housing, was Greenspan in the late Clinton years to the 2000s allowed people to take out loans, especially home loans for investment properties. And then when that bubble burst, that destroyed the loans market as well as the housing market. So that's something to consider. And think about this in Canada, Multi, if this happened in Canada. Because
That's bursting right now. The housing bubble is bursting.
Here's a funny thing too. I just saw a story because I was prepping for streams, like I have to do myself. China just prosecuted a high-level person who was doing home loan frauds. They have entire ghost cities built where all these people who are poor are supposed to move into these high-rise cities. Look them up. Ghost cities in China.
I'm not surprised.
They are these millionaire mansions. They have invested so much into other foreign investments and basically home building and building projects. It's almost that's going to be the decline or the crash of their economy.
That will be ours as well. Canada is already following that path where it's crashing. Many people cannot sell their houses anymore.
Appreciation basis, the TSX Composite Index actually outperformed Canadian housing over the same period, and substantially so once dividends are reinvested. The point is not, therefore, that housing beats stocks. The point is that housing performed like an equity investment in a non-productive asset. A company, when it rises in value, has generally done so by producing something, a product, a service, a patent, a drug, a piece of software. The stock price reflects real economic activity, real production. A house, when it rises in value, has generally done so because land in a desirable location has become scarcer, because planning restrictions have...
I'll stop it right here 2 seconds. Also remember, Multi, if you were to apply for a loan, because I'll have people call up, I live in a very decent area. These people call up, I go, can you secure a home loan for, let's say, $700,000-800,000? No, because they can't meet the loan restrictions. To sell or buy a home in a lot of areas, you need to be pre-approved to buy a house. Interesting.
Strained supply, or because a decade of historically low interest rates created a wall of capital seeking.
Oh, and by the way, U.S. just started raising its interest rates, and the contractions have been very interesting on home loans too, because it hit the loan, and this alone in the last year just hit the home. Because basically people in their 30s, they'll say, you afford a home, you're likely inheriting a home now in the U.S. because young home buyers are between 30 and 40.
Somewhere to go. The house didn't invent anything. It didn't employ a research team. It just sat there. This distinction matters because of leverage. If you bought a Toronto home in 2005 for $300,000 with a 20% deposit, so $60,000 down, and that home is now worth around $900,000, your original $60,000 has generated a capital gain of $600,000. That is a 10 to 1 return on the actual cash invested. It's also, in Canada, entirely tax free if it was your primary residence.
And here's the other thing. A lot of people, I knew of people, they were doing investments, right? They would
Yeah.
invest in business because you see how he's talking about a home is a generational. You have a lot of people going from individual ownership down to family housing, which prior to 2000, right, you didn't have this issue. There was a change. Tell me if this sounds familiar, because I've talked about this on your stuff before. This guy's a financial guy, and he looks at markets and has the numbers. That's why I said
Our housing market was more affordable like 20 years ago when we had conservative in charge.
But you're getting what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Let's assume the Airbnbs and everything else, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was costing much less to build because that was easier. There was less regulation.
Residence. If you had instead taken that same $60,000 and put it into a TSX index fund, it would be worth roughly $195,000 today. A solid result, but it gets diluted because of capital gains tax on the profit. The incentive structure this creates is problematic. The rational economic choice for a Canadian household with savings has been for 20 years to put as much money as possible into real estate as early as possible at as high a leverage ratio as your bank will allow. This is not irrational behavior, it's an entirely logical response to the incentives that the system created. It is, after all, how everyone you know made most of their money. The consequences of this are considerable. Housing prices in Canada's major cities now sit at somewhere between 12 and 17 times median household income. The median after-tax income for a Canadian individual in 2023 was $74,000 a year. At the national average price of $661,000, the price-to-income ratio is approximately 9. In Toronto and Vancouver, it's substantially higher. In 2020 and 2021, CIBC estimated that roughly one-third of first-time buyers received a parental gift to fund their down payment. The average amount was 82,000 Canadian dollars, which, as it happens, is slightly more than the median Canadian individual.
So what he means is people that were able to purchase things, it's because they had donation, they had extra money people were giving them, and that extra money is now higher than the average paycheck people are having today. So that means people back then, they have the money to actually give money, and this is how they generated the wealth we had for years. And now what's going on? We have less money than what we were giving way back then. So that means we are impoverishing. We are becoming broke. We don't have the money anymore. We are not as rich as we used to be, and these graph shows it. I mean, when
you're talking about the earning potential, because when we go from the concept of the baby boomer generation, you can see this in the US. And then I go back to the South Park episode that talks about it, and oh, now it's gone. That one. It's very much the case of people are going back to living at home because it's literally no longer an insult to say, oh, you live with your parents. Like, most cultures live with their parents until they're married or well to do. Okay?
Yeah.
People are dumb at this day and age, okay? They'll say that this isn't the case. We're going back to generational housing. And
That's not wealth.
it's not really wealth. You're having one or two generations living underneath a thing or living near each other. I've had this in my own family where, yeah, but they had to move. But then you move the parent back into your house to keep them there.
And I think this is a sign of the loss of generational wealth. We lose that generational wealth we used to have. We are broke. So I guess we can play more now.
Annual after-tax income. In Vancouver, the average parental gift was 180,000 Canadian dollars. In Toronto, it exceeded $130,000. The Bank of Mom and Dad has in certain Canadian cities become the largest mortgage lender in the country. It doesn't, however, publish accounts. Amusingly, in researching this, I found a Canadian real estate industry publication where the author argued that what Canada's housing market needed was further tax relief for property owners on the grounds that this would stimulate more housing transactions. I don't like to beat up on someone, but consider the environment in which it's being made. The average home in Vancouver costs more than 17 times the average income. The suggested solution is to make property ownership even more tax advantaged than it already is. This is a bit like a doctor seeing a patient with high blood pressure and suggesting that they eat more salt. Technically, it will do something, it's just not obvious that the something is helpful. The political economy of this situation is almost perfectly paralysed. Approximately 66% of Canadian households own their own homes, meaning that 2/3 of the electorate have a direct financial stake in keeping house prices high. A government that credibly committed to building sufficient new housing to return prices to something resembling affordability would be asking a majority of its voters to accept a substantial reduction in the value of their single largest asset. In Britain, we identified this as the central political obstacle to housing reform. In Canada, the problem is essentially identical. The 2026 World Happiness Report contains a data point that I find genuinely striking. Canada overall ranks 25th, which is a significant fall from 6th a decade ago, but still a respectable position for a country that is, by any objective standard, wealthy, peaceful, and well-governed. But when you break this down by age, the picture changes substantially. Canadians over 60 rank in the global top 10 for happiness. Canadians
And this is because they had their houses when they were young, when it was normal to have an house. And way back then, they were the one that generated the generational wealth in their parents as well. So they had the money we don't have anymore. And that's why they are happy and they don't give a crap and they vote liberal.
under 25 rank 71st. 71st, below countries with a fraction of Canada's per capita income. That ranking reflects not just where Canada stands, but how fast it has fallen.
And by the way, I will also address that GDP is boosted by immigration as well. That's why we have opened the floodgate, because we pretend we have money moving around. Well, it's more like people moving around.
The World Happiness Report tracks the decline in youth happiness since 2011 across 136 countries. Of those, only 3 recorded a steeper drop than Canada: Malawi, Lebanon, and Afghanistan. One of the 3 has a poverty rate above 70%. One has been in active armed conflict. One is governed by the Taliban. Canada is the 4th. There's a clean explanation for this divergence, and it is the housing market. Older Canadians who bought homes in the 1980s, 1990s, or early 2000s have, through the entirely normal process of sitting in their houses, accumulated wealth that would have been the envy of a successful entrepreneur.
And by the way, I will also add this: in the 80s and 90s, we had conservative as well in charge. So we had the liberals in from the mid 90s to the mid 2000, and then 2006 we had the conservative all the way up to 2015. So like from 1980 to 2010, we had half of that time, more than half of that time, with a conservative government. And that's when we were prosperous. But hey, let's keep giving liberal free reign.
The median senior family in Canada holds net assets of approximately 1.1 million Canadian dollars. The median family, where the main earner is under 35, holds approximately $159,000. This is not because young Canadians are less capable, less hardworking, or less disciplined. It's because the asset that generated extraordinary returns for the previous generation is now priced at a level that makes it structurally inaccessible without either a very high income, a parental transfer, or both. Youth unemployment reached 14.7% in late 2025. Approximately 914,000 young Canadians, just under a million, were classified as NEET, not in employment, education, or training. This is the mechanism of generational wealth transfer that the housing market has created. It's not a conspiracy. Nobody designed it this way. It's simply the predictable outcome of a set of policies, planning restrictions, tax treatment of primary residents, mortgage incentives, and low interest rates that happen to be extremely good for people who owned assets 25 years ago and are considerably less good for people trying to acquire assets today. It also, incidentally, explains why the country's most talented young people increasingly look south. Which brings me briefly to Elon Musk. Elon Musk was born in South Africa. At 17, he moved to Canada, where he held citizenship through his mother and stayed for approximately 2 years before relocating to the United States. He's now variously the world's richest person, the owner of Twitter, which he acquired for $44 billion and renamed X, and a figure of considerable political controversy in the country that eventually kept him. I bring him up not as evidence of Canada's loss, but because of the underlying pattern. Talented individual arrives in Canada, acquires residency, departs for the United States for better economic opportunities.
And that's what we call the brain drain. The talent are leaving because they know there's no future in Canada, so they go where there's an actual future, the USA.
There's nothing really unusual about this story. It is, in fact, the dominant finding of a July 2025 Statistics Canada study on skilled emigration. The study found that roughly 22,000 to 35,000 Canadians move to the United States each year. More striking, about 60% of those applying for US work authorization from Canada are not Canadian born at all. They're skilled immigrants who came to Canada first and subsequently moved on. The median US salary offer for these individuals was $137,000.
Which is a lot higher than our median. It's like 50K more than our median. So that's why they see the USA and they're like, oh, there's money to be made. And I'm not as taxed as the Canada. So you know what? I will move there.
Primarily in computer, mathematical, and engineering fields. Canada attracted them, educated them in some cases, and then lost them to a market that paid more and taxed less.
There we go. And again, the USA are embracing a lot more than Canada. The free market. You guys respect and like the free market. Canada hates it. So yeah, that's what's going on.
The Conference Board has called this the leaky bucket problem. Canada has one of the world's most generous immigration systems. It brings in large numbers of highly educated people, but one
That used to be our point system. So those who don't know it, so the point system, I will try to make it brief, but what it used to do is, okay, are you educated? Yes or no? Yes, okay, you got a point. Do you speak French or English or both? You speak both, here's 2 points. So now you got 3 points because you check these mark. Okay, are you a young individual or are you old? Oh, you're young, another point. So now we are already calculating 4 points. Oh, that's cool. You will be one of the highest person in our list of approbation when it comes to let's accept new people in the country. So the point system was quite good. It really made sure that we only had what we needed, what we wanted. And it was very hard because if someone wasn't like a four, they were a one or a two, and they're placed side by side with a four, they wouldn't be accepted. So we would filter out a lot of the lesser element, like the old folks that only want free healthcare. They would be filtered out because they're old folks. But you know what happened with Trudeau? Trudeau opened the floodgate for immigration because who cares about points? And this is what happened. 12 years later, we have crisis in every department, um, housing crisis, job crisis, everything, inflation crisis, everything. Again, our point system used to be great. We just trashed it. So let's play more of that. The brain drain.
1 in 5 skilled immigrants leaves within 25 years, with the highest attrition in the first 5 years, precisely when they're the most economically mobile and most likely to be comparing their Canadian prospects to their alternatives. Canada is not, on this evidence, suffering from a brain drain in the classic sense. It's functioning as a very efficient talent incubator for the United States economy, which is a service, I suppose, just not one that Canada intended to provide. Since 1997, Canadian labour productivity has fallen progressively behind that of the United States. The cumulative gap is now approximately 26 percentage points. To put that in terms that I think are more intuitive, for every dollar of output generated by an American worker in an hour, a Canadian worker generates roughly 74 cents. This is not a story about working less. Hours worked per Canadian are broadly comparable to those in the United States. It's a story about where those hours have been directed. The economy has channeled its investment, human, financial, and physical, into sectors that produce lower output per unit of effort. Real estate, public administration, retail, and a financial sector that lends against bricks rather than ideas. Canada's business investment in research and development as a share of GDP has been below the OECD average for 20 consecutive years. The gap between Canadian and American R&D spending per capita is large and widening. A country that doesn't invest in the
Because
production of new
immigration
knowledge
drive
or new
down wages.
processes eventually
It's not
finds
as
that
appealing
its
to work
workers
in
are doing the
Canada than
same
there
things
is to
in the
work
same
in
ways
USA.
as a
More
generation
tax, less
ago,
money.
which is roughly what has happened. There is a further structural point worth making about the composition of the workforce. Between 2015 and 2025, public sector employment in Canada grew by approximately 30%. I'm not arguing that public servants don't provide valuable services. Many
They're
of them do.
costly.
It's just worth noting that a growing share of the highest security employment in Canada is in sectors that do not, by definition, produce exportable goods or generate productivity growth in the conventional sense. The Bank of
So what he means is we are not making money by selling something. We are making um, the people pay for service that they are getting. So basically, money just leaves our pocket. It goes in pocket of others, but it's like a transfer. It's kind of hard to explain, but basically what he says is public service, hospital, library, school. They don't create goods, they don't create money, they simply move money around. um, so that's why we don't have a really good GDP, because we got a bloated public service. So we pay for the salaries of many people. So bottom line, we just have less money being traded, because our money is just moved around, instead of just creating something. Like when you say, oh, you know what, I will give a contract to that agency, to unlock jobs or to unleash, uh, I don't know, like wealth. It's very different. Um, so do you want to add something, Dragon? Because I think it will be better, and I'm a bit tired, so I ramble around.
Sorry, I had just very sudden sick to my stomach. What was his point? Which part you at?
So now we are talking about service versus producing actual wealth
So
and
yeah,
good.
so when your manufacturing sector shrinks, you go back to being a goods and services. The reason why it works on the US is because, see, we have access to a large availability of natural resources. We choose not to do it. That's why the Chinese build in international waters, right? They build in international waters. They drill sideways into our stuff. You have places like Florida, San Francisco, Southern California. Their beaches turn black not from the pollution, from all the crude oil that bubbles up, right?
Yeah.
We could easily do that. But a lot of our own regulations and, let's say, net zero policies hurt us. So we invested where we could. We went into Silicon Valley, the tech sector, commercial sectors, goods and services. That's what we export. We still use some of our own, but it's it's not the stablest economy, and it comes and it goes, basically.
So I think I have a better way to frame what I was trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the goods and service economy, where you pay for these
Oh, hold on a
service.
second, Multi. You need, and here's the thing about, you need, for a goods and services economy that everyone forgets. This is why it doesn't work in China. China is largely an export economy. It's not a consuming economy, because
Yeah,
the wages don't match the ability to earn.
yeah.
You
So
need
so
spending power.
so yeah, spending power. So the goods and services, it's only spending money. It's only moving money around. Now, if you have an economy that's based on manufacturing or exploitation of resources, then you actually generate money. You actually create money. You actually do more than just moving money around, because now you will sell something to someone else. You will get someone else money from outside the country. So you will earn more money for your country. And that's the big difference. When you invest in healthcare, you know you lose your money. But if you invest in like minerals or oil, you know you will actually make some money, because you will sell it, and you won't necessarily sell it to your neighbor. You will sell it to other countries, and these other countries, this is when they will give you their money. And that's the big difference. You actually generate wealth by manufacturing or providing something to other countries. If you only um, generate money in your own country, you don't really generate money. You just move money around. Um, you need other countries to invest where you are, um, to actually bring money back. I don't know if I was clear on that. Again, I'm a bit tired. I try my best to really expand on how it's better to have a manufacturing economy than a goods and service economy. Um, I tried my best, but uh, those who know. Let's play more of that. I see time flies. Let's do this.
Canada's most recent forecast for real economic growth is 1.25% annually. For an economy with Canada's endowments, that is unimpressive. Approximately 75% of Canada's exports go to the United States. For reference, total merchandise exports to the US represent roughly one third of Canadian GDP. No other developed economy is so comprehensively tethered to a single trading partner. This concentration was, for a very long time, a reasonable arrangement. The United States was a stable, rules based market. The two countries shared a border, a language, a legal tradition, and a broadly aligned foreign policy. NAFTA and later the USMCA provided a framework of predictability. Canadian businesses rationally chose not to spend money developing Asian or European market access when the American market was so large, so close, and so accessible. The problem with concentrating your economic exposure to a single counterparty is that you're entirely dependent on that counterparty's goodwill and continuity of policy. Recent events have illustrated this risk with some emphasis. Nowhere is Canada's strategic exposure more visible than in energy. Canada holds the world's third largest proven oil reserves, the vast majority in the Alberta oil sands.
And if we really add something else than good and service over manufacturing, we could actually sell a lot of oil and be rich. And with all of that money, we could actually pay for all of the safety nets, all of the goods we are already paying. But we would have more money in our pocket because we would sell our oil, our mineral. We are rich. We just have really bad leadership that doesn't want the people to prosper. They want the corporation and their cabinet friends to prosper. Let's play more of that now.
The United States is the overwhelmingly dominant customer. Because Canada has historically lacked sufficient tidewater export infrastructure to access Asian or European markets, it has sold oil at a consistent discount to the global benchmark price. WCS is a heavy sour crude, more expensive to refine than the lighter American benchmark, and some discount is structurally warranted. But the historical gap of $15 to $20 per barrel was consistently larger than the quality differential alone would justify. The excess reflects a transportation premium that accrued not to Canada but to the American Midwest refiners, who, for decades, were the only buyers with ready access. The Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion entered commercial service in May 2024. It added approximately 590,000 barrels per day of capacity, bringing total Trans Mountain capacity to around 890,000 barrels per day. The WCS WTI discount has narrowed since then, from roughly $19.82 to around $12.52 per barrel. This is progress. The pipeline cost approximately 34 billion Canadian dollars to build, against an original 2012 estimate of 5.4 billion Canadian dollars. That is a cost overrun of roughly 530%. It remains one of the more spectacular infrastructure project management failures in recent Canadian history. But it is built and it is moving oil to tidewater. The more interesting counterfactual is Energy East. Energy East was a proposed 4,600 kilometre pipeline that would have carried 1.1 million barrels per day from Alberta to St. John, New Brunswick. The Canaport terminal at St. John had already received 300 million Canadian dollars in upgrades and can accommodate supertankers, much larger vessels than those serviced by the Vancouver terminus. Energy East would have opened Atlantic and European markets in addition to Asian ones. It was
By the way, the liberals don't want that. because they are net zero freaks, and a lot of their voting bloc are green zealot freaks. So they hate oil and they don't want us to use our resources.
Cancelled in October 27.
Let me say this. Do you remember them? Do you remember Lucifer the Doberman talking about the pipeline would have been finished? The
Yeah,
funny thing about this is Polyev talked about it in the interview with that one guy that we did last Saturday.
yeah.
He basically, the thing is, you're allowing U.S. tankers, but you're not allowing your.
Ours. Because
Indeed.
we are captured by the ideology of the far
You're
left.
talking net zero. That's
Yeah.
what got you guys captured.
Oil export would make us rich and
It would
happy.
give you a economic income, yes.
But we don't want that because we like being broke and socialist.
Following years of regulatory review, shifting political winds, and organised opposition. Several Canadians I spoke to in researching this video described the cancellation as the single most consequential strategic error in recent Canadian economic history. Canada also has internal trade barriers that function, according to the IMF, like a six
The cartels, Quebec milk cannot be sold in Ontario, and Ontario alcohol cannot be sold in Quebec.
0.9% tariff on domestic commerce. A wine producer in British Columbia cannot easily sell to a restaurant in Ontario. A construction worker licensed in Alberta may need to re-qualify to work in Quebec. A medical device cleared in one province requires reapproval in another. Eliminating these barriers, which has the support of 95% of Canadians, according to polling by Angus Reid, could, according to various estimates, add between 90 billion and 200 billion per year to GDP. This has been known for decades, but the barriers remain. On the topic of trade balance, Canada runs a goods trade surplus with the United States, but it runs an overall current account deficit when you include services and investment income. This distinction matters because Canada is sometimes characterized in trade discussions as a surplus economy in the Chinese mold. This is not accurate. Canada runs structural deficits in services, in tourism, in intellectual property, in financial services that offset its goods surplus. Canada is, in aggregate, a net importer. It is not a mercantilist economy systematically accumulating foreign reserves at the expense of its trading partners. It's a country that sells raw materials and manufactures less than it buys.
So, to make it clear, if I can try that, we are better at providing healthcare and public school than we are at providing the world minerals, oil, and we purchase a lot more to others than we are selling. And this is a chain effect where our economy is really not so great because we are spending more than we are gaining, and that drives us toward the hole, and that makes us broke.
So someone said it in the comment section of this. It's that Canada wants to be. It's like Carney talks about the ability to be a superpower, right?
Why
But
not oil?
to be a superpower, you need a couple of factors. There was a period for Canada, I would say roughly given a certain amount of time ago. But the thing about a lot of what it is, it's not like it's 100%. The when you go in on a lot of liberal policies like green energy and net zero, that hurts you guys, hurts like an
It will
economy.
be more costly. It will cost us a lot more. And again, we have structural deficits, so we spend more than we gain. And this is why our economy is down the drain. And this is why nobody wants to invest here, because they kind of know they won't make their money back.
Your regulatory commissions make sure of that shit.
Yeah. And the taxes.
I've spent the better part of this video cataloguing what's gone wrong. In the interest of intellectual honesty, I should spend some time on what is not. The FT's Tej Parikh, in two pieces that I would recommend to anyone thinking seriously about Canada's economic position, makes a point that I think is underappreciated. Canada's endowments are extraordinary. It has the resources, the institutions, the human capital, and the geographic position to be not merely a well functioning mid sized economy, but as Parikh puts it, a genuine economic superpower.
Yes.
Canada's endowments, as I described at the outset, are extraordinary, the kind that most countries would consider a permanent structural advantage. What's less well understood is the institutional capital that sits alongside them. The Maple 8, Canada's 8 largest pension funds, collectively manage around 1.6 trillion Canadian dollars in assets. They are amongst the most sophisticated institutional investors in the world. If structured as a sovereign wealth fund, they would be the third largest in the world. Canada's university system produces, by international standards, excellent graduates. A 2025 survey suggested that approximately 17 million university educated people globally would choose to move to Canada if they could. Canada's AI research
Okay, here's the thing too about it. Your brain drain happens because people graduate from school. Like, let's say, why do a lot of doctors, like when they're Indian doctors, don't practice in India? They don't earn enough to stay in India, or they can make more money abroad. Graduates leave, which causes a brain drain because of the fact that they cannot earn and they also have student loan debt. So you are talking, and see what's interesting about this part is it's not that Canada has been entirely screwed over. They make their own problems. Am I right or am I wrong? Because
You're right.
you can't
That's spot
earn.
on.
You would rather, most people, and this is even if you look in the US collectively, even places like Seattle and Chicago, the reason why a lot of the conservatives that have been basically ostracized as branded as traitors by the government and the governments at large or the people in the communities, the reason why they don't leave, like I was told this by a guy that I don't want to agree with him on a lot of ideas, but he was up in Seattle. I go, if you know Seattle or Portland's a shithole, why don't you move from here?
We don't have the money.
No, it's not the money. He goes, if I do, the area is just going to be filled by someone. The area is lost. Like, but I
That's
go,
great.
your area is already ideologically captured. It's as I
Yeah.
said earlier, right? The new hires don't replace the old hires. They make it more ideologically pure. This is why old game studios aren't as good as they used to be. This is why, like, Bungie is not the Bungie of old. You know what I mean?
It's now trash. Anyway,
You're talking like the
I
ideological replacement fucks you over.
I want to finish the video and then we will do a conclusion aspect to it. But yeah,
system centered on Montreal, Toronto, and the Vector Institute is genuinely world class. Jeffrey Hinton, Yoshua Bengio, and Richard Sutton, three of the most consequential figures in the development of modern AI,
Yes.
all did their foundational work in Canada. The country has something real to build on. Canada also holds the G7's lowest net debt to GDP ratio and deficit as a
Fuck
share
my
of the
life, that's a
economy.
lie.
Its fiscal position is, relative to peers, a genuine strength, which means that it has the capacity to
Well, it
invest
does,
if
but
it
it doesn't have
chooses
the
to.
earning
The
potential.
question is whether external pressure might finally produce the internal reforms that domestic politics have persistently failed to deliver. There is some reason to think that it might. The trade tensions of recent years have created in Canada a political consensus around economic self sufficiency that was absent for most of the last 3 decades. The internal trade barrier
We don't
discussion,
walk the
which has
talk,
been a polite
unfortunately.
academic conversation for decades, suddenly became urgent. The pipeline question acquired new political salience. Parik's phrase that Canada has spent too long being a client state and branch plant economy of the United States, which would have been controversial to say even 5 years ago, is now being quoted in the House of Commons. The case for optimism, then, is not that Canada will automatically get better. It's that the conditions that might force it to try, external shock, generational transfer of political power, a recognition that the status quo is no longer sustainable, are, for the first time in a generation, in place simultaneously. Crises, as it turns out, are occasionally useful. If you found this interesting, you should watch my video.
Okay, so I guess now it's time for the conclusion. I think Canada is clearly on a decline. It's obvious. Uh, our open border policies we had for the last 12 years, because it started with at the end of Harper, and that's why Harper lost, because he was no longer a conservative, but also because Trudeau was selling weed. Anyway, in conclusion, the Liberal destroyed the country. They wanted people to be numb. They wanted people to be high on something so they don't think about politics. They sold them net zero while flying in jets. So Canada has a serious lack of leadership. We don't use our resources and we pretend everything is fine. We pretend that, oh yeah, if there's an housing crisis, it's because of the Iran war, even if like we had that housing crisis for now 10 years. But no, it has nothing to do with immigration. Like we have a lot more immigrant than we have buildings to welcome them. But no, no, everything's fine. So I think there's a serious issue with denial among Canadian, and I think Canada is a warning to the rest of the world. Socialism can work, but you need the right leadership for that. And it's not any socialist that will come around and make it work. Again, I'm sure if you look around, you can find socialist country that did end up working. But without thinking, I know countries that tried socialism and it didn't work. It failed miserably. Canada is one of them. Argentina was one of them. They are getting their act together. So again, I can think of two great examples of how socialism failed, and I cannot find any of
I mean, okay,
places that work.
you're talking about the problem with the UK. I call it the politically correct culture. We called it in the 90s with the UK when they started PC culture, aka political correctness, which led eventually to CRT policies, then DEI. These things have all been like here for years as evidence. The trick about this is every socialist government that has said they works always fails. True communism has never been tried.
I like that meme.
This phrase has look. I'm a history person. The thing about Patrick Boyle is he he's very based on a lot of stuff. He's very dry. He's very much a numbers guy. He's not the type that's going to go, oh, this is Donald Trump's fault. He hits both the leftist and Trump at the same time. He has basically been like his stuff on like Trump or like because he had the more interesting outside take on the Epstein stuff as well. That's why I said I like his channel.
Yeah.
And I've watched him for years. But he's mainly a financial guy, as you can see.
Yeah.
Because he ran.
So to get back to really to the topic, so I think another big
Yes.
factor of Canada's decline and why it is a warning,
Mhm.
education is is really bad if it only provides the left. If it's more indoctrination than education, this is where things go wrong. We have monopolies. This is where things go wrong. We need a free market. Um, we are a warning again. I think it's also worth pointing out the generational wealth transfer is kind of ending because now people don't really have the money to transfer back anymore.
No.
It's no longer the late 90s to the early 2000s where we had the best middle class in the world. We are now dead last.
So
And
you're talking about, I would say this in Canada is the issue. There was an idea that you guys went more liberal because you guys follow Australia. Because, like, if we ever get into Australia or the actual UK politics, the thing is, if I can pull that one, I'll go pull the one when he talks about the UK, why it fell. They wanted to be open. Remember, I was talking about politically correct culture. They started letting social values change so much so, let's say, about the new Harry Potter or other groups. There is no such thing as a person who's from the UK anymore. There is no UK identity anymore. There is no Great Britons anymore.
I will also add this: immigration drives down wages. Immigrants are a lot more involved in politics. Therefore, they make sure their voices must be heard. And Canadian, those that aren't indoctrinated, they don't really follow what's going on. They are not connected to what's going on. So a lot of Canadian that should worry about the future of Canada don't. The apathy in politics is a big factor of why Canada is a warning to the rest of the world. And if we say let's not use our resources, it's genuinely saying to people, let's be broke because it's the right thing to do. It's disgusting. We are a country um, that prefers goods and service than manufacturing or actually giving worth and value to other countries. We are a
You produce really good soldiers. Like, I will openly admit, while US has military might, you guys have good operators. Irony is, some of you people,
it's falling off a cliff since
your
Trudeau.
operators, some of them actually hold the sniping records or did for a while
Yeah,
because the it's kind of strange, like small unit, because it's not like Canada is totally screwed. You guys fell for the indoctrination trap. Look at your look at the areas south of your border. Chicago, the areas around the Great Lakes. They're being invaded by Arabic people and Somalis and other people. It's not just coincidence or chance. These things have been coming up there. The idea, it's not that lower stuff drives down wages. If there's also a culture, your culture isn't protecting your legacy because you have a generation of activists that were taught. Like, when you go think about this. Anyone who watches your government at some point, all those politicians, just like in the US, AOC and a lot of younger Democrats actively believe in the messages they say because they are indoctrinated. Reality doesn't hit them as it hit the older generation. But these are the people who are the leaders of your new party. They are the people, like in the NDP and all this mess, they are that. But the problem itself is Canada needs to restore some sort of generational thing. You got to restore your national identity. Because
yes.
it's not, if we say, you can't keep blaming Trump for the issues. The idea, even Americans are saying, we support Trump, but Trump is also the world's biggest dumbass. Because if you look at a lot of his policies, he has this odd effect that he's just a person. But there's also pushback to his policies, even in the nation. And it's not coming, and it comes from both sides of the aisle. So the thing is, but we've never discarded our nationalism. We are still America first. Canada just needs to develop its own thing. You're always
And I think the biggest issue with Canada is Trudeau spent 9 years to tell you don't have an identity, you are not Canadian, you are a multicultural landscape.
globalist. We're going to
Yeah,
move towards the globalism.
and
Globalism, but
we got back our nationalist aspect when we were under threat, and that shouldn't be the way. Now, the last thing I want to say before we move to the outro, we are a banana republic where we are paying the chief to keep the First Nation broke while saying, "Oh, we care about the First Nation." This is Canada in a nutshell. We pretend we care about the environment while our leaders they spend more time in jets than in the House of Commons defending their stance on things. It's a circus. It's a clown show. And it's Canada. So I let's move on to
you
the
also
outro now.
you're all. I'll say this too, because there's the problem of in stage liberalism. This is happening with our Democrats, and this is the thing with progressives. This is why your progressive side and your far left people will argue with them. They became the same cronies they chose to fight against. It's
Yeah,
basically you have your own monoparty system. But US never fully fell for globalism. It was only a temporary thing for us. We use it, but we also still maintained our own national industry.
us it's structural. Anyway, what do you have going on your end of the internet?
I am working through Crimson Desert right now. I have a thing with Sorter at 12 p.m. Central Time tomorrow. The topic is going to be marathon and how Islamic cultures have been taking over the Western societies. And other than that, I'm going to eat and probably stream. So I'm going to be streaming in about 30 minutes or so after.
Amazing. Thank you for
Crimson.
joining me tonight. In my end of the internet, well, this weekend maybe I will be streaming co-op games. We'll see how it goes. Not quite sure there. Tuesday, I will be talking about No Time to Die and Spectre. Monday or Wednesday, I'm not quite sure. One of these 2 days, I will be streaming Splinter Cell once again, and and very soon we are covering Daredevil episode 4, 5, 6. I'm not quite sure when 6 drops. Is it next week 6?
I want to say 5 just occurred.
Okay, so next week is 6. So next Thursday, we are having a Daredevil Born Again stream covering episode 4, 5, and 6. And
Your thing on the boys just did episode 3, so 2 weeks. Yes.
yeah, and next weekend, not the one that comes now, but next week, we are reacting to the UK video. If you can find it, I think that'd be great.
It's not hard.
With this, thank you for watching, folks. Stay tuned for reviews, gaming, and more reaction content. Eventually, we will stray away from Canada because I said it several times. I'm kind of scared. I will be deplatformed, and I like the internet. I don't want to be kicked out by a totalitarian regime. With this, I am out. Have a great one, and take care. See you soon. Talk to you soon.